Everyone, welcome to the West Maui Greenway Master Plan Community Meeting number 3. I'm Lauren Armstrong. I'm the Executive Director with the Maui Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're the lead agency on the West Maui Greenway Master Plan. So a little bit of housekeeping on Zoom. I know all of us have been on many Zoom meetings over the past couple of years, but when you're participating, please rename yourself on the tab. You can click on your name to rename yourself. Please type any questions or comments in the chat, and I would request that you please type to all of the co-hosts. Please mute your audio when you're not speaking, just to keep from distractions. And then if you would like to view closed captioning, you can click on the live transcript or closed caption option and click on enable. And as an FYI, this meeting is being recorded so that we can share with others in the future. So a little bit about the project team. As I mentioned, Maui MPO is the lead agency. We're supported by a project team with the County Department of Parks, as well as the County Department of Planning. So we have Jennifer Maiden and Dave Yamashita helping substantially with this project. And we are supported by a consultant team of Alta Planning and Design and SSFM International. So for today's meeting, we're going to introduce the project team, do a recap on the project background, as well as our vision and goals for the Greenway. We'll share what we heard from the second round of community feedback over the past couple of months. Then we'll get into some really detailed maps looking at an overview of our preferred alternative for the route of where the West Maui Greenway is potentially planned to go. We'll also look at some potential design features. So things like how wide will the path be? What types of amenities can we see? Starting to look at some design guidance for the path. We'll get your feedback on some of these design features, and then we'll talk about next steps and have plenty of time for questions. So a little bit on the project background. For those of you who have been with us before, I'll try to move through this part quickly. So the West Maui Greenway has been a really popular project through the West Maui Community Plan, the Hele Mai Maui Transportation Plan, and really for a number of years through the efforts of advocates in the community. So Maui MPO is using federal planning funds to conduct this master plan effort, and we're really basing it on previous efforts made by the community to plan for the Greenway. And so ultimately the vision is to have a 25-mile path connecting Ukumehame to Lipoa Point. This would be done in sections. And I wanted to note some of the related projects happening in West Maui. I know it can get confusing, but we have so much going on. So if you look at the map, the orange line, you'll recall it goes continuously from Ukumehame to Lipoa Point. That's the scope of our Greenway project. Within that area, we have the West Maui Community Corridor Plan, and that's an effort that is just kicking off through our planning department at the county. And it's looking at multimodal improvements between Lahaina and Ka'anapali, really focused around identifying a bus transit hub, pedestrian and bicyclist safety, and making connections to the Greenway. So we are coordinating closely with that effort. Another important project to mention is the Honoapi'ilani Highway realignment. And this is a stretch of the highway that needs to be moved inland between Ukumehame to the southern terminus of Lahaina Bypass. And so this is something that the State Department of Transportation is working on. They are seeking public input through their environmental impact statement process, and really will have a lot of overlap in terms of planning for the Greenway in that area. So we're also coordinating closely with the state around that effort. So the project vision is to create a safe, comfortable, and joyful greenway through West Maui that serves as a multi-use path connecting people to destinations while highlighting the diverse history, landscape, and culture of the region. The goals that support that vision are to foster community, to bring joy, to strengthen connectivity, to promote safety and comfort, and to ensure feasibility. Some of the progress that we've made on the West Maui Greenway Master Plan over the past few months, we've looked at options for operations and maintenance of the path, governance, as well as different guidance for the design of the path. We've done a lot of work around the alignment of the path, so where it should go based on a number of criteria, as well as meetings with landowners and different stakeholders.
Thanks all. So Vesna and I, project manager and principal from Alta, will be walking through the next sections. So we're going to start by actually recapping some of what we heard in the last round of community engagement. And then from there, to Lauren's point, we'll jump into some of the preferred alignments. So Vesna, do you want to take it away and walk us through some of the things that we heard last time? And I can kind of weave in how we apply those to some of our design thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So our last meeting in March, just a few months ago, just a quick recap of who was there and what we heard. So we had 32 meeting participants. 52% of the participants live in West Maui, with 44% living in West Maui and 8% both living and working. We also asked all attendees which project goals are the most important. So you heard Lauren just now explaining what the project goals are that we have for the project. And so overall, promote safety and comfort was voted as the most important project goal. People had the opportunity to choose two. So the next three were actually tied, and those were strengthen connectivity, ensure feasibility, and bring joy. And last but not least place was foster community. And just some of the feedback that we received just throughout the course of the project in the last couple months. So here are just a few representative quotes. And this is some of the things that we're looking at as part of this master plan. So the first one is a quote that says, I would suggest separate lanes for running and walking versus biking. Another quote here is, to me, a greenway is about a natural transit experience. So being on the highway does not provide the same benefits. We heard a lot about agriculture and native landscaping that could be included along the path. So here, another quote here, urban agriculture to provide edible landscaping, another thing we're thinking about as part of this plan. And then finally, we heard some comments about where people didn't want the greenway to go. And so one thing we heard loud and clear was keeping the greenway from going through neighborhoods. So there's a quote here, I am in full support of a safe biking, walking, and jogging route through West Maui, but I am not in support of it coming through the already congested Waihipuhi neighborhoods. So just a little bit of feedback that we received in the last round of engagement.
Thanks, Vesna. So we'll take a pause here, and if people do want to come off mute and have any comments to date about the project goals and what we've covered so far, or anything that we heard last time, please go ahead and take yourself off mute. And if there's none, or you can go ahead and put those in the chat. If there's none, we can go ahead and move into the meat of the presentation, which will be looking at the preferred alignments and the design guidance.
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you for going forward with this. I spend a few months a year in West Maui. I love it, but bike riding there is kind of dangerous. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate the support. All right.
This is Saman, Maui Bicycling League Chair. I just wanted to thank MPO and Alta Consulting You folks have been extremely transparent, professional, and doing an amazing job. So I want to say thank you.
Thanks, Aman. Much appreciated. Okay, great. Well, I think this is probably the item that most people were interested in tuning in for this evening. So we're going to go through the various alternatives. If you recall, at the last meeting, we walked through a range of alternatives and we received your feedback. We mentioned at that time that what we'll be doing is taking those alternatives and running them through an evaluation process that was really grounded in these project goals. And then from there, the project goals create, design criteria that could help us define a preferred alternative. So we heard the input that you gave us loud and clear. We also developed some evaluation criteria, and we started to move those various alternatives through this process. But just to give you a sense of kind of how we orchestrated the goals and how we developed criteria. So those 5 key goals: foster community, bring joy, strengthen connectivity, promoting safety and comfort, assuring feasibility. From there, we developed these key criteria. So in the case of, let's say, for instance, bringing joy, that's the key goal. The criteria that we developed we'd be looking at the alternatives. And in the case of open space and recreation or views and vistas, we'd be looking at the proximity of an alternative to existing or planned open space recreation areas. So based on the proximity of an alternative, when you're evaluating it, looking at that criteria, one alternative may score higher relative to another. So we use this criteria to really guide us, and then develop these preferred alternatives. So let's jump in. We evaluated all of the alignments in sections. So Lauren had mentioned that long greenway projects like this, they tend to be developed, or they tend to be implemented in a segment or a section approach. It's difficult and uncommon, at least in my experience working on greenways, to develop the entirety of, say, 25 miles. So we organized it in terms of six key segments, and those segments were starting from the north and working south. Segment 1, Lapoa Point to Maui Prep. So you can see the map on the right here, gives you a sense of where that's located. And then segment 2 is a longer segment. So that's Maui Prep down to the Civic Center. Segment 3 is a shorter and fairly complex section. There's options there. And it was Lahaina Civic Center to Keawe Street. And then from Keawe Street down to the Rec Center. Section 5 is Lahaina Rec Center to Oluwalu. And then the southernmost is Oluwalu down to Lahaina Poly Trailhead. So we looked individually at each of those sections and the alternatives and evaluated them as such. And the reason we did that is we didn't want to take a one-size-fits-all approach. So it would be alternative A from Lapoa Point all the way down to Lahaina Poly Trailhead. We wanted to identify kind of which alternative makes the most sense for each segment, and then mix and match to develop a preferred alignment that scored the highest across all of these individual sections. So the way we're going to present this, and I know it's kind of, you're leaning in to look at these maps. So what we'll do is we've got three slides that we'll be walking through. So the first slide is looking at the alternatives associated with the segment. So this is Lapoa Point down to Maui Prep. And then the slide after this, we'll look at the evaluation results of that particular segment. So looking at how alternative A scored relative to alternative B on these criteria. And then the third slide, the final slide for each segment, shows the preferred alternative. So what rose to the top, and that's one that we've zoomed in at, so you can get a real clear picture of what's rising up as the preferred alternative. I will note though, you'll see here in some instances, some of these segments are pretty clear cut. We had clear cut winners. But in the case of a long greenway, there's a lot of complexity, right? And there are certain segments where alternative A, alternative B, or alternative A and C, or B and C actually are both considered to be the preferred alternative. And the reason why that is because there's instances where kind of two key criteria, there's some uncertainty there right now. So one is on planned projects, so timing for planned projects. So Lauren had mentioned some of these other projects that are going on. There may be great opportunities to actually link up the West Maui Greenway with the development of another project, but we're unsure where that project is in terms of its implementation schedule. So we didn't want to rule an alternative out that could score very well, say if a corresponding project and adjacent projects being developed, we don't want to miss out on that opportunity. The other one is in the case of right-of-way. So we've done our best to go up and down the corridor and communicate with various landowners and key stakeholders to identify, their kind of sentiment towards the Greenway and their willingness to work with the Greenway to be implemented. But we don't have a guarantee or a complete surety in all instances. So again, we didn't want to put forward an option where we didn't have complete certainty. So in that instance, we may have two alternatives that rose to the top, which is really common for long corridor projects because there's going to be subsequent phases. And as the project evolves, things will come up, and we want to make sure that this planning effort does not discount future opportunities. So you'll see that coming up. So the first segment here is looking at Lapoa Point to Maui Prep, as I was mentioning. And we went over this last time, but I'll just recap it briefly. Alternative A is navigating along the highway and then taking the lower Honopilani Road and then making a connection up to Hui Road, whereas the alternative B alignment is actually running along the upper highway. So those are the two alternatives for this segment. And in terms of our evaluation criteria, alternative B was the top performing, so the upper road. And a lot of that has to do with a couple things, but most importantly, it's this promote safety and comfort. And if you come down here, the way this table is organized, if it's kind of a dark gray square, it scores really well. If it's a light gray or a light like a white rectangle, then it scores poorly. And promoting safety and comfort, this upper Honopilani Highway, it has fewer intersections, right? One of the things that we heard loud and clear is the desire for a continuous and unobstructed greenway. And in the case of this upper highway, we actually have a good deal of right-of-way for the greenway to be placed on the Mauka side of the highway, and you could have a continuous separated path. And that's a significant difference from this lower road where there's several intersections, there's lots of driveways and a lot of potential for conflict. So that's just an example of one of the key criteria why alternative B in segment 1 rose to the top. So I'll go to this next slide so you can get a sense of the sequence. So this is what that preferred alternative is here. Hopefully you can see it in that full screen mode. But traveling along the highway, and then at the break here is where the upper road, the highway really opens up, and we'd be envisioning a separated path, which we'll have images of what that looks like later in the presentation so you can get a clear view. But it would be a fully separated pathway on the east side of the Mauka side of the upper highway. So then moving on, the segment 2 was Maui Prep down to the Civic Center. And this, the three alternatives that we looked at was alternative A, which is carrying the lower road alignment, and then making a transition up to tie into where the sugarcane train tracks currently are, and then navigating the sugarcane train tracks down at just west of the Civic, or just north of the Civic Center, making a transition to an old Cane Hall Road, and then tying into the Civic Center. So that's alternative A. B is going from the Prep Academy and largely following the Cane Hall Road. So that's off, separated from the highway. And then, out around the base yard, transitioning to the sugarcane train tracks, navigating the train tracks all the way into the Civic Center. And then the alternative C is going from the Prep Academy along the Kane Hall Road, but then going up Puukoli Road to navigate to an upper Kane Hall Road. So there's an on-street segment there, and then navigate along that upper road and then tie into the Civic Center. So those are the three alternatives that we evaluated. And alternative B in this instance, so the alternative that runs along the Kane Hall roads and then ties into the sugarcane train tracks, was the alternative that scored highest. And one of the things that really kind of separated this alternative is things like level of effort and exposure to vehicles. It's this great combination of being completely off street, running along the sugarcane train tracks or running along the Kane Hall Road, and it's relatively flat. So if you're comparing it to, say, alternative C, going up Puukoli Road, it's a significant climb. Of course, it'd be great coming downhill, but we have to think about going the other direction too. And so alternative B in that instance scores quite a bit higher. There's also kind of a wide stretch there to implement amenities, things like landscape or green infrastructure in along the corridor. That was something that was a key priority. And environmental review and permitting that we looked at. This one scored best and seemed to have the kind of the least obstructions in terms of that environmental review and permitting. So alternative B, here's another look at it in the larger view, traveling down the Kane Hall roads and then following along the sugarcane train tracks down into the Civic Center. I think there's been some discussions about potentially, diverting from the train tracks or following the train tracks and then going into the lower road. And that's an option as well. But largely it's kind of those two big moves. It's using the Kane Hall Road and then using the sugarcane train tracks to navigate into the Civic Center. So moving into segment 3, so this is a shorter segment, but fairly complex. We have two alternatives. If you joined us in the last meeting, you saw actually several other alternatives and iterations. I think some direct feedback we got from the last meeting and then subsequent follow-up meetings was we had an alignment that went through the Waikuli neighborhood, and we removed that and we focused really on these two alternatives. Alternative A that follows along the Malo Street or the sugarcane train track alignment and then goes up behind Lahaina Gateway and ties into Keawe Street, and alternative B that follows this upper Kane Hall Road and then navigates down into to Keawe Street that way. So this is an instance where I mentioned we've really got two alternatives that bring a lot of value. When we first did our initial evaluation, alternative B scored the highest. This is the alternative that navigates up along the Kane Hall roads and then drops down into Keawe Street. But a lot of what was impacting the evaluation was some of the right-of-way availability. And when we reran the evaluation and we were looking at right-of-way availability along Malo Street, they ended up scoring very, very similarly. And so this is an instance where we've got two alternatives, both provide merit, and after much consideration and evaluation, we're saying that both of these alternatives are viable and should be carried forward in the master plan as preferred potential alternatives. So let me go ahead and blow it up here. This is a look navigating from the Civic Center down Malo Street and then up behind Lahaina Gateway versus the alternative running along this Kane Hall Road and then navigating down to Keawe Street. So two instances where we had our evaluation criteria and our modeling, but as we went back and looked at it and thought about just the complexity of this corridor in terms of right of way, we wanted to have an opportunity to keep both alternatives and carry them forward. So moving from Keawe Street to the rec center, this is an instance where we had 3 alternatives and several design options. So I'll start down here. Alternative A was running down and connecting into the Pioneer Mill site, but essentially following the sugarcane train tracks down to the highway and creating a side path condition along the highway, and then tying back up into Mill Street, and then traveling down Mill Street to the rec center. And you can see here we have multiple design options. So we have a design option that goes behind the brewery, so it follows the sugarcane train tracks and then goes behind the brewery, and then either ties into the highway or would cut across the Pioneer Mill site. And then we also have a design option that follows a planned project, which would be the Kahua Street extension project, which when it was master planned, actually had a multimodal path in that design. So there's kind of multiple iterations in in this alternative A. And then alternative B is traveling up the highway and then making a connection into Lahaina Luna Road, and then following a Cane Hall Road down into the rec center. There's a handful of owners through this stretch here, and there's also a planned project. So this dashed line is the future Lahaina watershed flood control channel. So that's a flood control basin that would be constructed in the future, and the banks of that flood control channel could accommodate a trail, a pathway in the future. So we have that dashed in there. And then we have a third alternative C that travels up the bypass and then makes a connection down into the rec center. So it uses the bypass predominantly to make the connection in the rec center. And of the three alternatives that were evaluated in the various design options, alternative A rose to the top for a number of reasons. Things like the environmental permitting, perceived safety, level of effort, it's fairly flat, exposure to vehicles, proximity to activity centers. This one scored quite high. And you can see here, we have two alternatives shown. Within alternative A is the preferred route. And the reason for that is this opportunity for that Kahua Street extension project. If that project were to move forward, it would make sense to try to be opportunistic and build the greenway in conjunction with that project. However, in the meantime, there are alternatives that travel down along the train tracks down to the highway. And we want to keep those options on the table as well. So those have been fully vetted, but that travel into Mill Street and make that connection to the rec center. So moving on, so this is segment 5. So this is going from the rec center down to Olawalu. And you can see here, just to be absolutely clear, this dashed box here, this is the box or the extents of the highway realignment project that's ongoing right now and is in the planning stages. But just to go through the various alternatives, there's an alternative A, which follows the Mill Street alignment, and then also travels onto the edge of the existing highway, travels up to the bypass, uses the existing signal, it makes the turn at Laniapoku Beach, and then goes down and uses the existing highway to travel into Olawalu. There's the alternative B, which is using the bypass, and largely using the bypass, and then the existing highway as it currently stands into Olawalu. And then alternative C, which is using an existing path that's following a ditch trail and goes more Mauka, but then travels down into the highway, and then largely uses the Cane Hall Road to travel into Olawalu. And in this instance of segment 5, alternative A was the top performer. And you can see there's variations here, but alternative A, just it scored well, just opportunities, access, parks and recreation, the direct access to Laniapoku Beach, level of effort, it's the flattest route, and the right-of-way availability. So a lot of this travels along public right-of-way and is kind of a lighter lift than potentially some of the right-of-way of the other alternatives. So let me go ahead and zoom in here. So just to kind of go through the variations between kind of this cut or this split between alternative A at Laniapoku Beach, it's really predicated on the realignment project, because if the realignment project were to come through, there's actually, you know, out by Cut Mountain, you could carry forward along the lower highway, and when the realignment project's done, a lot of the vehicular traffic would move off the lower highway potentially, and then move to the bypass or to the new highway alignment, thus making that a pretty seamless connection. But there is uncertainty around when that project will happen. So an alternative is at Laniapoku Beach to travel up Kaihaleku Street and use the existing signal, because from this signal here, there's actually a pathway that's adjacent to the current highway that was built as part of the bypass project. And so you could use that signal and then tie into that existing path, and then travel potentially along the Cane Hall roads, but in the case of the realignment, along the current highway, the lower highway, which would become lower volumes, become much more enjoyable to ride on, having a fully separated path adjacent to the highway, just by doing some highway reconfiguration, because the volumes of traffic will be so much lower. So those are kind of two variations there, and they really depend on other project schedules. But you can see just overall alternative A that follows that Mill Street alignment in the lower road is the preferred choice. And then finally, segment 6, which goes from Olawalu down to the Lahaina Poly Trailhead. So we have two alternatives here. Alternative A that follows the highway. There is space available with some, and there's existing crossings too at some of the streets that intersect the highway that are already striped. So that's an option. And then or following alternative B, which is the Cane Hall Road. Keeping in mind that in the case of this realignment project went forward, or when this realignment project goes forward, that would take a lot of vehicular traffic off of the existing highway and just open up a lot of opportunity for placing a greenway highway adjacent. So in this instance, alternative A was the highest scoring alternative. And you know, a lot of it has to do with, you know, some of the access to parks and recreation. There's just kind of direct access into Ukumehame Beach. The level of effort, it's fairly flat, and there's just lots of right of way. It's right of way that's available. And in the case of the highway realignment project, if that came through, or when that comes through, it would make this a very comfortable route in terms of level of stress for greenway users. So what does that look like here? So that's a blow up going from Olawalu to Lahaina Poly Trailhead. Great. So I have given you a lot of information, and it's a lot to digest. So what I'm going to do is open it up for this poll and the opportunity for Q&A at this point. So the poll is for us to collect data on just kind of how you feel that we did. For those that are on the phone, do you agree with the preferred alignment? The first option, strongly agree. Second is somewhat agree. Third is no opinion. Fourth is somewhat disagree. And you would text in strongly disagree. You'd use number 5 if you strongly disagreed with those alignment selections. And just as a reminder for those who are on the phone, I think we do have a couple. The number to text into is 503-893-9784. Great. Thanks everyone for jumping in and doing these polls. Looks like we've got, yeah, quite a few people who've, I think that's about the extent. We've a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds to see if someone else wants to add in their choices. But I do, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and yeah, let's see here, I'll share results. I'm pleased to hear that people strongly or somewhat agree, predominantly strongly agree. There's some somewhat agrees. It'd be great if someone who disagrees, it looks like we had someone who disagreed. I would love to hear that you disagreed with the alignment in total, or if there was a specific segment. If you're willing to either put it in the chat or feel free to come off mute. We're always interested in hearing kind of some more of that nuanced feedback. Or if there's anyone else who wants to come off mute and add any comments or thoughts on the various alignments and the preferred alignment that we're showing here this evening. Hey, Mark, I see you're off mute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I appreciate all you guys' hard work on this. And it's great that you're sharing all this as you go through it. I somewhat agreed. I like the northbound stuff. I just had some questions with the 2 southbound segments. We know why they're planning to realign the highway because of the sea level rise threat.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, how is that going to impact that portion? If you're running it along the old highway, eventually that's going to be compromised. So what is the plan to deal with that?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's a really great comment. We're going to touch on it a little bit in subsequent slides, but I think now is a perfect time to address it. The thinking there and what we've seen done, there's other precedents like Devil's Slide pathway, where essentially there's a realignment of a highway or roadway, and there's an expectation that eventually that what was translated into a greenway would there would need to be retreat essentially involved in it, as opposed to trying to revet or armor the pathway. And that's the kind of the approach that we're going to be discussing in the final master plan, is this notion of using the facility that's out there now, but as the new bypass or the new highway alignment is built, that it's constructed to a level that provides good quality access for greenway users. So this would be the highway built with kind of a multimodal component to it, providing a side path built in, so that in the near term, the lower road would be used until it deteriorated to a point where it was unusable. And at that point, because the new highway realignment accommodates greenway users, the greenway would use that alignment. So it kind of creates multiple options. But that's the thinking. So you get, let's say, 20 years, 25 years, maybe more, maybe less, of using that lower road. But then the new infrastructure that's being built is being built to a quality that would accommodate safe, active transportation use. So the greenway could then use that in the future.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Great question. Any other thoughts or reactions?
Devin, it's Lee.
Hey, Lee.
I just want to, I know we've talked about this in the past, just want to go on record by the fact that I think that the alignment there behind the brewery on Mill Street should be more emphasized. I think it would be a lot simpler to try to go behind the brewery and then straight across, maintain that Mill Street alignment in a straighter avenue versus trying to go around over onto the highway and then back again. So forth. Seems like it'd be a lot simpler and cheaper to do it that way. So that's something I just want to be on record for. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Lee. And we're continuing to explore that, vet that with the property owners. So.
Hi, Devin. This is Molly. I just had a quick question. I think everybody's really excited about this greenway. I just had a question about where segments 3 and 4 meet each other at Kiave Street, coming down off the bypass. Those of us who live kind of in the area know how busy that intersection is with cars coming and going off the bypass. So have you guys looked into, safety concerns there with people crossing there at Kiave Street?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good comment. I do know that there's some other kind of safety projects that are being explored along Kiave Street. Kind of our take on it is, given the speeds, given the volumes, and given that this would be an all ages and abilities facility, the Greenway, that it would require some signalization to create a safe crossing. So where we've drawn in that specific dot, that's conceptual. There's other safety improvement projects that may shift and change, but the idea would be that a Greenway would have a safe, either a hawk signal or a full signal to get users across Kiave Street safely. So fully acknowledged. Great point. And I see, Lisa, you have your hand raised.
Yes, two things. One, I just wanted to confirm that the path is going to be protected, kind of like the picture that's behind you, where you're totally separate from the street and cars. Is that correct? Like you have there's one slightly on the other side of the island.
Yeah. So, I mean, I get the image behind would be, we'll go through some of our typologies. That would be more of a Mauka, but the idea is that a pathway that's still within the right of way of the highway would have a buffer between the path of travel for vehicles and the Greenway at a minimum of 5 feet. And we'll show you some renderings of that would have potentially a landscape buffer or other barriers, kind of safety improvements, so that you're fully separated.
Great. And then my second sort of question is, will the landscaping be more attractive than the one that is existing on the other side of the island, which I really appreciate that it's there, but it's not the prettiest part of Maui?
Sure. So we'll go through just kind of our thinking at this point in terms of the plant selection. It's predominantly native species, native to the island, and we're really going to be promoting that for a range of reasons. Low water use, opportunity for added kind of habitat potential. But at this point, we don't have the segments, fully designed or detailed. At the planning phase, it's just trying to identify the kind of the plant types, and then as the project progresses, it would get into more detailed design. We'll show some images of kind of what we're thinking and visualizing for the corridor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. All right, got DR with a hand raised.
Hi, first of all, I think the plan is great. I put a comment in and I thought it went to everyone, but I realized it only went to one person. So I fully agree with whoever the person was that said that there was going to need to be some changes to the signals and traffic around the Gateway Center. It's just absolutely a mess getting out of there as it is. So that's my first comment. Mm-hmm. And the second one is, I would see if there's a way to avoid Kaiheliku and Laniapoko State Park, because parking there is already a nightmare, and it's trafficky and it's dangerous as it is.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great comment. And just to clarify, so Yeah, so just acknowledge your first comment regarding some of the signal improvements. You know, we've been talking about Cayave Street, but that would really be the case that there's actually, there's a number of at-grade crossings. Even when you're navigating along the Cane Hall Road, there's still instances where there's crossings. And so there would need to be, you know, adequate safety improvements throughout the corridor to keep, you know, to maintain that safe, seamless experience. Regarding the Laniapoku, so I understood, you know, the way the traffic is navigating through there, and parking can get pretty congested. So we were envisioning it actually on so if you're on the north side of that intersection and you're traveling north back towards the rec center, on the Mauka side of the highway, there's an existing Midwest guardrail, and there's actually some space separation there. And so that's kind of where we'd still be within right of way, but navigating there. There's actually a crossing that's there currently that's striped. And the vision there is that you could use that with some additional striping improvements, use that crossing, and you could either navigate up towards along on the south side, you can navigate up towards the signal, or you could navigate along the old highway past Cut Mountain. So we think that that's a way to kind of avoid all that cross traffic and parking congestion. So I know I'm using a lot of hand waving, but yeah, that's what our thinking was.
Kaihaleku can get really bad, especially on weekends down there.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a way to avoid that little strip between Laniapoko State Park and the highway, I would avoid it.
Okay, thanks, noted. We'll take another close look at it. Excellent. I do want to keep moving. We're at kind of 10 to the hour. We have quite a bit to cover. So, but I do see another hand raise. CG, did you want to come up and make a comment?
Yeah, aloha everyone. I'll talk super quick. One thing for Laniapoko, I used to live in that area, and they need a bridge for the passengers going to the park and trying to cross the road. I have seen so many near accidents, it's been terrifying. So if there's any way to have like a walkway, everyone's been asking for it for years, but it's never happened. So just that. And then I also wanted to pinch in about segment 4, the preferred alignment of A. Basically, I live in the Komamai area, and Komamai is kind of like a second bypass. There's choke traffic on here, and people really go fast around the bottom of the corner there. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a safe spot, just as a heads up.
Thanks for the feedback. That's great on both fronts. So this is good, hearing a lot about the Laniapoku area, so we can go back and as part of the master plan, we're kind of blowing up certain intersections and try to develop some solutions or rethink those areas. Thanks. Okay, well, great. Well, thanks everyone for not only participating in the poll, but also giving some feedback on the alignments. That's great. We're going to document that, and we can weave it into our next phase of work. But I wanted to revisit this. This is what we're going to do here, is go through, we've talked about it, you know, fat lines on a map. What does that look like in terms of the facility itself? So we're going to start here with just some path fundamentals. So when we're considering the greenway, we're considering kind of two types. So there's the shared use path. And in the instance of the shared use path, kind of the minimum path of travel width is 8 feet with 2-foot buffers. So, 12 feet total. And in that instance, that's where bicycles, pedestrians intermingle on a shared use path. We talk about shared use paths being implemented in areas that are typically where there's fewer modes and just fewer users, because the alternative is what you see on the right here, in instances where there's more folks and then more people using different types of devices, in using bikes, potentially e-bikes, people walking, pushing strollers, walking their dog. We promote the separated path. And in the case of the separated path, what you have is about 8 to 14 feet potentially for rolling users. And then you have a dedicated pedestrian path that would be 4 to 8 feet. Typically it's a soft surface, a crushed gravel, something that's a little more friendly to walk on and even roll your stroller on, but is a little less friendly to people riding bikes. So it's a way to kind of use a design feature to create a safer, more pleasant corridor for a range of users. So those are the kind of the two path width types that we're exploring. And then in terms of the types of path, it was brought up, is the path going to be like this image right behind me here, this fully separated path? Well, in the case of something like a rail to trail or the Mauka or Cane Haul, yes, there's corridor. This is on the right here, an image of the existing sugarcane train tracks, where there's this corridor that's running that's fully separated from the highway. And in that instance, you could implement either a shared or a separated path along this corridor. Same for the Cane Haul roads. I brought up Cane Haul roads. This is an image of the existing Cane Haul road. So translating that into a dedicated, either a shared or separated path that would be fully separated from vehicular traffic. This is an example of that, the Mauka more upland Cane Haul road. So potentially a bit narrower. We see this, it's farther away generally from activity centers. So probably better suited to a shared use path. But this is an image along the preferred alignment that I showed you that's out there. This is when we say the Cane Haul road, this is what we're describing when we talk about the Cane Haul road in an upland or a Mauka environment. We do have a section, so running along south of Mill Street. This is the flood control adjacent. So this is an important typology because this exists out there today. So, and I mentioned there's some other planned projects in the future where they're building the flood control basin, and then they have levee banks, and those levee banks are typically already paved because they're for maintenance vehicles. And this is an instance where the pathway in its kind of basic form already exists out there along the corridor. And then this would be an instance where it's kind of the in-town typology. And so what we're showing here is this is actually a stretch of the, so this is just south of Keave Street. This is where the sugarcane train tracks before they enter into the Pioneer Mill site. So in this instance, it's a lower volume road, but what we would propose is likely a grade separated. So that would mean it would be a curb height. The greenway would be at the curb level and would be separated by a buffer. We're promoting, in the case of heavier volume roadways like a highway, a minimum of 5 feet and a minimum of 3 feet in these kind of lower road or lower volume conditions. And you can fill that buffer with landscape or other barriers to add safety. But kind of this is also along that image on the right there is along the preferred alignment route that we showed earlier in those maps. And there was an instance where question about is it going to be fully separated along the highway? So this is that example where I mentioned you have an adequate buffer. So this is actually looking, it's a little bit farther north, but it's looking down the Cane Haul Road and it's adjacent to the highway. You can see there's already an existing landscape buffer there in place. So we'd be looking to capitalize on instances like that. There are other instances where we would need to develop and implement that buffer as part of the Greenway project. And in those instances, it would be a minimum of 5 feet. But we still are trying to create that kind of fully separated experience, even when it's within the same corridor and the same proximity as the highway. We talk a lot about, or we're going to be discussing in the master plan, but talked a lot about implementing green infrastructure as part of this Greenway corridor. The Greenway can provide multiple benefits, and really that's what we're seeking to do with the Greenway is, yes, to implement something that gets people from A to B. I think that's our base goal, and that's what we're trying to promote. But there are other opportunities, and there's other funding streams that could support things like additional native planting or integrating things like cool paving, shading features, things like that, to just make the user experience a nicer experience. So these are just opportunities that could be explored in and along the corridor, all using ulu or noni native trees and shrubs and ground cover to continue to promote habitat and promote more drought tolerant planting. We go through, we are going to have several access points, right? I mean, as you kind of exit and enter the greenway, there is a lot of opportunity for things like bike racks, things like shading, kiosks that have interpretive signage on them, lighting to make it easy, more comfortable to jump off onto the greenway. So those are certain elements that are being considered for the West Maui Greenway and will be included in the master plan. And really importantly, wayfinding components. You know, you saw there's stretches of the greenway that kind of largely exist out there now, and wayfinding is going to be a really critical component to kind of knit the entire corridor together. So things like I mentioned kiosks, but also decision signs, turn signs. So people, as you're traveling down the corridor, it directs you into Lahaina town or to other key destinations. And to give you a sense of kind of the separated versus shared condition. So this is actually looking, you can see the sugarcane train car there off in the distance of the existing image. This would be a separated use pathway where you've got dedicated space for rolling users, and then you have an adjacent pedestrian path with potentially shade structures, seating areas, native planting, as well as lighting along the corridor. So to give you kind of a better look at that, some of the key elements, this is that 8 to 14 foot rolling path with the 4 to 8 foot pedestrian path. So that space is available out there along that sugarcane train track alignment. So that's something that we're considering. Versus a more Mauka alignment, it's kind of farther, destinations are farther between. So this would be a shared use condition here. So looking at 8 to 14 feet of shared space, but still having opportunities, pockets for native planting, vertical planting trees to provide shade, but kind of creating that shared use condition. Or in the instance of a highway adjacent, so there's a question about kind of what would it feel like adjacent to the highway. So this is an instance where we have a buffer space between the highway that we could fill with planting as well as lighting, and still have a shared use condition with things like wayfinding to create still a comfortable pathway. So this is an image looking down one of the Cane Hall roads down closer to Olowalu, where we'd be proposing a shared use condition because it's a kind of a bit of a less dense area, but still providing some of these features to make a really comfortable path. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to stop sharing now in just a moment because we are going to do an activity, and what we're going to be doing is using this Poll Everywhere software. So what we do with Poll Everywhere as opposed to the Zoom polling, and I'll put it into the Zoom chat, or Vesna on the team already did. You can click, if you look into your chat, click there. And what we're going to be asking you to do is rank certain design features. It's like we all want all of these things, right? That's what we hear all the time. But this won't be a blue sky activity. You're going to have to make hard choices and decide what are some of the design features that you think are most important to you. And then we're going to talk about why you think they're most important. So I'll stop sharing. And Vesna, just to reiterate, if people look into their chat, but it's pollev.com/altaplanning107. And what you do in this activity to get started is you scroll over the image to the left, and there's a little up arrow and a little down arrow, and you can rank these various design features. So the first question is, what type of path element would you most like to see? Rank your preferences by moving your top choice to the top and your last choice to the bottom. So there's options like, oh, great, people are jumping right in. Lighting, hydration stations, shade structures, so on and so forth. So feel free to, if you're on your mobile device, you can also access it that way, and you can start to rank your top choices. And you'll see that as people start to do the activity, the selections will change. So if people have questions or are having issues, technical difficulties, feel free to come off mute, send us a chat, and we're happy to help you.
I'm having technical difficulties. I'm on an iPad.
Oh, an iPad. So if you, let's see, it's been a while since I've used the iPad. And Vesna, you can come off if you know better than I, but my understanding is, can you hover your finger over the image to then pop up the up arrow or down arrow?
Yeah, on a cell phone, you should be able to just go ahead and click on one of the images, and then two arrows will show up. So I would imagine the iPad should have the same function.
And if you're having more difficulty still, feel free to just write in the chat what you think your top priority is, and we can add that in.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about the technical difficulties. All right, we'll leave it open for, we're still getting some votes in. All right, looks like we're just seeing lighting and seating in the middle there leapfrog each other. So it's looking like shade and hydration stations are rising to the top. Sounds like, is it a really hot day there today? Everybody's very thirsty and seeking shade. Curious if someone wants to come off mute and describe, or if you voted as actually your top choice was fix-it stations and bike parking. Yeah, it'd be great to hear kind of why you selected those, just for the rest of us to hear. If anyone wants to come off mute, it'd be appreciated.
Personally, I think that the bike fix-it station is important because it's such a long trail. Unless there's phones set up or something, there's going to be someone who's going to pass out from the heat, someone who's going to need water, and then the bike fix would be the next one. So I think it's quite important.
That's great. Thanks for that feedback. Yeah, there are long stretches. Go ahead.
I put lighting first for completely a safety perspective. This is part of it is next to a highway, then hydration benches, etc. But obviously, I went with safety, the lighting, not getting hit by a car.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And do you feel in those long stretches in between too, yeah, just wanting to be seen? Is that something that's, yeah.
And also there are some areas that I don't know who the people are, but I want to be able to see the people that are around there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seeing and being seen. Thanks. Yeah, that's great feedback. Does anybody want to come off mute and say why they selected what they selected? Okay, well, then we're going to move on to the next poll here. We've got a handful. So Vesna will pull that up. Share her screen in just a moment.
I do love that you have lighting as an option because it gets dark so fast, and it would be nice to be able to ride in the evening as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Lisa. Thanks, Lisa. The in-between sections too, right? Being able to kind of guide your way could be really important. Okay, so this is getting more into the aesthetics, the look and the feel. So you have an option here, a range of seating types, and we'd love to hear from you all on just which of the seating types, and this is purely an aesthetic choice, which makes it fun. But it's identifying which one you think would be most suitable and make the most sense for the West Maui Greenway. So take a look at the images there, and please go ahead and rank your choice in terms of the seating you think would work best, look best for the West Maui Greenway. This is great. This is really jumping around here. There's the options are really fluctuating. I'm looking forward to hearing thoughts and feedback. We'll leave it open, and it'd be great for someone to come off mute, say kind of what was it about the architectural form? What was it about just something you saw in the image that rose to the top? And this sometimes, this can feel a little arbitrary because yes, it's all seating, but the seating really kind of plays into this overarching brand and identity of the Greenway itself. And so kind of getting feedback on these features can be really impactful in terms of creating a cohesive space that is really enjoyable for all. So yeah, I would love to hear some feedback on why people selected what they selected. Oh, I see a hand raised. Is it Gentry?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
So I personally like the rock wall seating one. I feel like it kind of looks aesthetically proportionate to kind of the whole topography of the west side.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a few of the other ones are a little too modern, maybe.
Okay.
The rock one just seems to me to kind of fit into the landscape.
Yeah, thanks, Gentry. And that's great. Those Gabion rock walls. Yeah, you can. Oh, look, you're already courting votes. I saw just got bumped up to first. Nice plug. But you can go ahead and use rocks in and around the landscape to really make it feel like it fits and blends in. So that's good feedback. All right, any other thoughts, sentiments?
I raised my hand. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I didn't see the other hand raised. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No worries. So is this all or nothing?
No, not at all. And it's supposed to be a fun activity, and the idea here is kind of what your preferences are. But yeah, it could be a blend of seating types along the corridor that have kind of different looks and feels. So please.
Yeah, to me, man-made architecture or structures like this should blend in with the scenery and what's going on around. So I think that maybe a variety, a mixture of these would be best. To me, the fourth one looks very, because of its contours, like beachy. So like maybe when the Greenway is closer to the beach, that might be a more eye pleasing or like blend in a little bit better, but maybe on the more dry upper sections, the stone wall would be sort of a better option. So I think a sort of a mixture of these would be best in my opinion. But I do like the idea of, you know, if we're making these man-made structures, it blends in as much as possible with the environment around it.
Thanks. That's a great point, and I'm glad that you brought it up. There could be multiple structure types in different areas, but what I'm hearing is this desire to kind of respond to the context so that it's really sensitive and blends in, similar to the previous responder. Thanks for that. And I see, let's see here. So Saman, is your hand raised? I see.
No, I think somebody used I forwarded my login. So
Okay.
they're logged in as someone. But I do agree that for West Maui with the rock wall, I like that idea, just kind of blends, and some of the other ones are a little bit more modern. So I agree with the first Janet Tree, I think, her feedback. So thank you.
Thanks, Saman. And I see, John, were you the one who just came, who had his hand raised? I think so, and gave you feedback.
Yes, yeah, this is John, and this is actually my wife Jocelyn is the one that has the comments, as well as the dog. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody has a comment. So one of the things that I noticed is the material that's being used, and if it gets hot. So there was one choice where it was metal, and my worry in that one is, even though aesthetically it might look okay, it could get very warm and not be possible to sit down on.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and it's pointed. So typically we would always pair a metal structure, a seating structure, with a shade structure to try and mitigate that. But I think it's a great point. Things like wood, or that's got concrete with kind of a higher albedo, or would contrast the reflect the sun, is going to be a bit cooler.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one. This is great. Thanks everyone for getting the hang of this ranked choice exercise and giving your feedback. It's fun to see. So this one gets at the lighting. So specifically, we had a few comments about safety lighting, and we just want to get feedback from you on kind of the look and the feel of the light. So we've got, just to give you a sense, kind of, there's embedded path lights. So those are kind of guide lights that would draw you along a path. There's overhead pole lights. There's bollard lights, so kind of lower lights that would light the path. There's a more modern, and that's an image of a solar integrated light, the kind of the fourth option down there. And then there's an integrated light integrated into a wall or integrated into furnishing. That would be another choice. So I'll leave you all to it, and love to get some feedback on what your choice is. It's great. So we're seeing at least at this point, that could change, but the bollard lights, or the kind of lower post lights, and then the lights that are integrated into furnishings or walls, kind of those embedded lights, are rising to the top. Does anybody want to come off mute? Oh, there we go. So the taller post light is coming up into second place there. Does anyone want to come off mute or raise their hand and tell us why you voted the way you voted? I'd be really curious to see kind of why the embedded lights down there are sitting in fifth place, and why people selected what they selected at the top.
How easy or how how indestructible are the embedded lights? I mean, what's the chance of having to replace these over and over again, just due to, I don't know, vandals or homeless or something like that?
Yeah, great question. You know, if done well, they can be as not indestructible, but as stout as a post light or a pole light. There's several great examples of embedded handrail lights on bridge structures for pathways, and they last a really long time. So yeah, it's a good question. But if designed correctly, they can be equally as able to withstand the elements and people that might want to vandalize them. Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
This is John. I guess my only thought was, I don't think I like the idea of having poles. It seems like poles would be a negative in terms of the view. So that's kind of why I voted for those that didn't have poles sticking up.
Thanks, John. Yeah, something that's kind of a little bit lower to the ground and integrates with the path more. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I have a very loud cricket in the background. It just moved into my space. So I apologize for my background noise. Okay, well, great. That's all good feedback. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation again, make sure that we've got enough time to get through the rest of the presentation. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it's going to start from the beginning. Lots of slides. Excellent. Before we move on, and we just got a few more slides left, but we also got some great comments that came in too. So Saman had wrote, or maybe it was Saman who signed in using your link, but it doesn't seem like you're neglecting it, but your wayfinding points in the slides brought up the thought to my mind to emphasize the belief that this also needs to be a service and ideally a draw for commuters, so not just pleasure riders. This would be very impactful if it made green commuting safer and accessible to locals. So yeah, thanks. Good point. We will have an entire section in the master plan on wayfinding. And then there's also a comment here. For the seats, you can't make it too comfy as it may become a bed. Yeah, and that's a great point. You want to make it great for Greenway users and comfortable, but potentially not overly comfortable, and also just easier to use by people riding skateboards, grinding, things like that. So we would integrate those features. Thanks for that comment, CG. Great. So before we transition, the next couple slides is going to be a look at operations and maintenance and some other components of that. But before we go on to that, we covered a lot of ground. We looked at preferred alignment. We looked at the potential pathway types. Thank you all for participating in the poll activity with us, where we looked at lighting and different features. Are there any other questions, things that haven't been asked previously that we can address now before we move into the next section and kind of close out the evening? Oh, it looks like we have a raised hand here. John, do you still, sure. Is that
I do, yeah. No,
Perfect.
This is a new raised hand.
Great.
And I put it in the chat, but I think litter, I don't know where we are on litter receptacles. And I'm sorry, this is my first meeting, so maybe you've talked about that before. That's really important, as well as pet stations. I don't know where we are in terms of the frequency and how those get serviced and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So that we have a portion of the master plan that gets at operations and maintenance and the governance of the facility, but kind of some of those nuanced things like the pet stations, I don't know that we have integrated in and addressed. So thanks for bringing that up, John. We'll make sure to weave that into the master plan. And it looks like Lisa, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I'm super excited about this whole plan, and I just wondered what the timing is, and I apologize if you already addressed that.
Can you say it again? This cricket just got in my ear. Oh, geez, Lisa.
It's great ambiance. I like the cricket. But I said I'm super excited about the whole plan. It's wonderful. And I just wondered what the timing is, because I'm ready to ride my bike on the plan, right on the path right away.
Understood. So, yeah, it's a good point. So the master plan, this effort goes through till about the September timeframe, and kind of running parallel to that is seeking funds for the next phase of work. There at this point there is no construction dollars identified for the future phases, but we need to get through this process here before we move in and to the next phase, and it will likely be done in a kind of a segmenting approach. So we'll show you a slide on schedule here in a moment, but the next piece of this planning effort is to look at all those segments and prioritize which segments are kind of most shovel ready or best suited to move forward. Great, and I see Gentry has a hand raised. Gentry, did you want to add something?
I was just wondering if it had been thought out as to how the homeless would be regulated so that they wouldn't, start camping out or, just how is there any plan for that?
Yeah, this is a great segue. We can talk through, a lot of that comes down to the governance structure and how the pathways operated and maintained. At this time, we don't have an operator identified, but in the master plan, we've identified some strategies for how to manage it appropriately so that it always feels safe and comfortable for all users. So I'm going to go ahead and use that as the segue for Vesna, if you want to kind of walk us through these next few slides that get at O&M and corridor commercialization, things like that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanted to briefly touch base on the topic of operations and maintenance for the Greenway, since as we noticed just now, it's just something that has come up repeatedly over the course of this project. So during the last meeting, we shared some example case studies from the mainland describing the organizational strategies that different trails use to operate and maintain their facilities. So this time we wanted to share a local example from Kauai. And so some of you may be familiar with the Kauai Path, which is managed by their Department of Parks and Recreation. Their beautification division maintains the path, along with help from other department divisions, like their Parks Department or division rather. Park rangers patrol the path, so they tend to deal with day-to-day patrol and maintenance and safety issues. And then the police department also assists with larger issues that might come up. The Kauai Path Inc. is an associated nonprofit organization that helps with cleanups and includes ambassador and volunteer programs for local community members. And so this is a type of partnership that, between a public agency and a nonprofit organization, that is something that could be considered for the West Maui Greenway corridor in the future. And the next slide. So we also wanted to touch briefly on the issue of commercialization, which is something that, again, we've heard repeatedly about, concerns related to commercialization of the Greenway. So through interviews and case study research, we've identified a few potential strategies to address commercialization in the future along the Greenway. So one strategy is to prohibit commercial tours, specifically commercial bike tours along the Greenway, to prohibit them entirely using the commercial activity ban at Canoe Beach as a precedent. Another strategy is to, instead of prohibiting this type of activity entirely, but to consider charging parking fees for non-residents or charging user fees for commercial tours and limiting their hours of operation to non-peak hours. So these fees can also be used to fund greenway operations and maintenance, and it can, the prohibiting or rather limiting hours can help limit traffic and user conflicts along the greenway. And then just finally, in line with other state strategies to encourage good visitor behavior, the future greenway operator could promote visitor education and volunteer work from greenway users as well. So that's another consideration for future maintenance that could be partnered with the nonprofit organization potentially. And with that, I'll pass it back to Lauren to talk about next steps and timeline for the project.
Thank you, Vesna. So I'll just give a little overview of our schedule. We've been working on this master plan since last summer of 2021. As you saw from tonight's presentation, a lot of thought and discussion has gone into the route alternatives and evaluating the best route. Our trail design guidance is nearly complete. We'll be finalizing some of the visualizations that you saw tonight, and really wrapping up on our environmental permitting matrix, just to understand what would be involved in the next phases of the project. So our team will be developing the draft master plan by September, and also identifying a priority segment to move forward with first. We'll also have some cost estimates that will assist with our seeking additional funding for next phases. We'll be having a final community meeting in August to review the master plan. So we hope you'll be able to join us for that as well. And Maui MPO is working with the county to secure funding for the next phases. So design, permitting, and construction. So really looking to leverage this great work that has been done on the master plan to move forward within the next 5 years. I know that sounds like a long time, but in transportation project world, that's a realistic timeline to get something on the ground. And finally, we just wanted to open up the floor again if there are any final questions. Also would offer that if anyone wants to discuss in more detail, feel free to reach out to myself, Lauren at mauimpo.org. You can also find a lot of information on our project website, which is posted on the slide. And with that, I'll open the floor for any other questions.
Lauren, one last thing I was going to add on the website, we are integrating, we have a web map and it's going to have the preferred alignment in that web map as well. So if people want to go back and revisit it, review it. And then if they have any general comments, feel free to enter them there. And the website's up on the screen here. Looks like Gentry has a hand raised, or is that Gentry from your previous comment?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
That's what.
Well, I just want to say a big thank you to Devin and the Alta team for all the work that they've done on this. Also to Saman and Lee and the West Maui Greenway Alliance for being project champions throughout this effort, and all of the stakeholders that we've talked to. It's just really helped bring the project to life, and I feel confident that we're moving in a good direction, and really excited to come back in August with the draft master plan for you all. So with that, unless anyone has other comments, we'll say good night and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks all.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.